Heyo, welcome everyone to episode 78 of Today in the Scene. I'm Joe with Indie Arcade Wave, and I just want to say thank you for checking us out. If you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It means the world to us, and it really helps us grow a ton so we can keep bringing you more guests like this. So this week, we're going to speak to another arcade owner. His name is Daniel Bush. He owns Analog Arcade Bar, which there are multiple locations, but the location that I found on Instagram was the Davenport, Iowa location. So we're going to bring Daniel in here, and we're just going to talk about a whole bunch of arcade things as well as what's going on with his location. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot, man. I'm really glad that we were able to get you on here. I know we had to reschedule a little bit because of both of our schedules, but everything worked out, and here we are.
Right on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'll just have you introduce yourself first. Just let us know a little bit about yourself, as well as what are some of your earliest video game memories, whether it be arcade or just general video games.
Yeah, so my name is Dan Bush. I'm from the Quad Cities, born and raised in Davenport, Iowa. And I'm basically in the bar business. So I have 4 different bars. I have 2 arcade bars. I have a little cocktail bar called Devin's Complaint Department. And then I have a bar with 100 beers on draft called Armored Gardens, 3 of which are located in downtown Davenport. And then I have an analog arcade bar over in Moline, Illinois, which is about just across the river from us. Been playing video games my entire life. Started off with a regular Nintendo back in '87, maybe, and just got hooked ever since. Started going to an arcade when I was a kid. There's a local pizza chain called Happy Joe's, and that's how I found out about Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 and all those type of games, and just kind of caught the bug that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, sounds like a pretty standard video game entry. You get in on the NES. Most people did. And you just kind of kept moving. It's cool that you own a whole bunch of different bars. So you had like an idea of what the bar scene looked like before you got into the arcade. I'm assuming. I don't know if that's the direction it went. But I guess we'll start there. Where did the arcade start? Was it like pre-bars, after bars? Like when did you get into that space? And how did Analog start itself?
Yeah, so Analog, our first location, opened up 6.5 years ago. We were pretty early on the arcade bar scene. I was working at Jimmy John's. So I was the operating partner of 5 Jimmy John's, just kind of socking my money away with the goal of eventually opening up a bar. I found myself going to a bar in town that had your standard golden tea and your silver strike, but then it had one Street Fighter 2 machine. And I just kept going back to that bar and playing Street Fighter 2 because I hadn't seen one of those in, 15, 20 years. And so then basically I bought one of my own on Craigslist, brought it, into a storage closet at work and got everyone hooked on playing, and then started discovering that this type of concept was popping up in cities around the country. There were 3 in Chicago at the time. There was Emporium, Logan Arcade, and Headquarters. And then there was one in Des Moines that had just opened called Up Down. And so I got some guys together and we checked out those locations and thought it'd be a great idea to bring it to the Quad Cities. And so that was our start. And, here we are after COVID and everything else. We're still going. So we're happy about it.
Yeah, that's cool. I worked at Jimmy John's too when I was in college and kind of moved on from there. And that seems to be like kind of where everybody got the bug back for the arcade is like the Street Fighter cabinets just kind of stayed alive forever. Because you look at the arcade scene and things kind of died down, but then the fighting game community came out and that was the most recent like resurge in the arcades. That was what got you hooked on the games, kind of brought everything back. What were some of the other games that you collected after that? And when was it that you were like, okay, I need to collect enough games to actually start an arcade?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was really after we bought that first game that I just started writing a business plan, and I had never written a business plan before. So I just Googled good business plan and just tried to fake it. And then we pitched it to a bank and they somehow said yes. So we basically got funding, and then we didn't have a clue on how to find games. So it just started with Craigslist, and it'd be the type of thing where we would drive to Chicago to buy one game, meet somebody, and then we would leave with 4, and then they would point us to a friend on the other side of town, and we'd go to their house and buy a few more, and we just started collecting them really rather quickly. Before we knew it, my garage at home and my partner's garage were just filled with everything from Terminator 2 to some really huge, more environmental games like F-Zero. We all got hooked on ice cold beer. That was the first game that we just really hadn't seen before, that we really became addicted to. And it was just kind of a fun adventure. It was so new at the time, and I love seeing these things pop up all over the country. I've helped other places open up around the country It's a really fun world to be in. And, despite everything over the last couple of years, people are still into the idea. So that's the really exciting thing.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that is rather quickly to like just collect them. And that's always how it seems to be in the community is like you find someone that's got one, they've got a friend who's got 6 more, they've got a friend who's got 10 more, and it just piles and piles. And then you have too many, you got to go somewhere with them. So you were talking about some of the games you've collected, right? And you told me you have 2 locations. You have one location kind of laid out differently by the first floor and the second floor. Kind of walk us through like what you can remember mentally, like what games do you have in there and how do you have each arcade laid out?
Well, I think what you do when you first start is you try to cram as many games into a space as you possibly can. And then over time, you really figure out that less is more. We used to have at one point in our original location, we had about 60 games. And we're down to between 40 and 45 games at any given time, just to give people more space to breathe. And also just the games that we've kind of transitioned into are the bigger footprint games. We're buying a lot of games through a middleman who gets games from, places like Dave & Buster's. So Time Crisis is a perfect example of a game that people who are in their early 20s know. They don't know Tapper. They don't know Burger Time. It wasn't a part of their world. So you have to find the stuff now that they can connect with. And so they just take up more room. So there's less games, but you can charge more for those games. So it all kind of balances out.
Right. So how do you have like, is it the Davenport location that's larger than the other one?
The Moline location is a little bit bigger. As far as layout for the Davenport location, it's really, we have kind of a back pinball room that gives you some privacy. We have some more pinball up front. That location has about 15 pinball at any given time. And that's where a lot of our regulars come there for is the pinball. The arcades and the Skeeball are more for the weekend kind of party crowd. But our day in, day out regulars are more of the pinball crowd. And then we just added a console area to our Davenport location, mainly because, we know that's where the early 20s people, that's what they know. Their older brothers and sisters had N64s. And so, we're bringing out Mario Kart. We're bringing out, WWE SmackDown. We're bringing out Twisted Metal 2 so that they can drink and kind of play games that they can connect with, because not everyone grew up with arcades. I'm dating myself, but around the time I was in high school, they all died. I don't remember arcades when I was in high school. It was really kind of a junior high and before thing. And so now we're reintroducing people to games that they had never seen before. But our space in Davenport is really cool because it's actually an old bank. It's about a 120-year-old bank. So we have, games in a bank vault. We have a vault completely dedicated to Guitar Hero. So you kind of have your own space to really hear the music and play. And then our other one is, has just classic games like the tried and true Galaga, Pac-Man, Burger Time, Tapper, Frogger, games like that. So we try to just mix it up and having a little bit of everything for everybody.
I like that, how you kind of like looking at each age group and demographic and how you can appeal to them, but also like if they're too young for the arcade games, you can connect them back to it through like a 64 or a PlayStation. Really good idea. And the layout, the bank is cool. That's a really unique thing. I don't think I've found any arcades that are in old banks. I've seen like movie theaters and stuff, but that'd be cool to play Guitar Hero in a vault.
Yeah.
I guess we've talked about your locations and games and stuff plenty. Let's talk about where you see the arcade scene going. You brought this up, and I thought this was a really cool point. Where do you see the scene going? What do you want to see from indie developers, and what do you want to see from like the bigger companies like Raw Thrills and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, I think I think there's an innovation problem. I mean, there are so many arcade bars popping up all over the country. It's having a huge renaissance, and I feel like there's a threat to it, and that's the lack of innovation specifically on the arcade level. I think pinball are very accessible. People can walk up to a pinball machine and really understand it right away. Even if they don't understand the deep rule set, they at least understand the concept of it. I think people are less likely, what we found, to step up to an indie arcade game because they're just not familiar with it. So we've also seen that, with Stern having all this competition, they've been forced to innovate, so they got away from the DMD screens. They've moved towards, the video screens and really, really kind of high-end pinball machines. And they're coming out with several every year. But as far as the arcade side, Raw Thrills and those type of companies are coming out with stuff pretty much specifically designed for places like Dave & Buster's. and they have massive footprints and massive price tags. When you have one, Jurassic Park Environmental, it's gonna run you 15 grand new. If you want to pick one up on the secondary market, you're looking at 6 or 7 grand. So I don't have we don't have investors. We're just dudes who wanted to create something, and so we don't have super deep pockets to buy all these $15,000 games on a whim. So you almost want to see if there's proof of concept somewhere else before you try to bring it in where we're at. So our concern is always when we start getting into space and don't want to play the games as much, then we know we have to get more games. But we've ran through every classic arcade that anyone knows in 6 years. Everything from the 1980s early stuff through the mid 90s stuff. So our fear is that there are no more NFL blitzes and NBA jams and turtles and those great games that people remember. That they're not making those type of games anymore. And that's what I would like to see is arcade, small footprint, affordable arcade cabinets with titles that people are attracted to. Can you make a Futurama or a Breaking Bad arcade? Can you use those kind of licensing tools to create something really, really special that people can connect with now? I think, with Cuphead, that's a perfect example. Side scrollers still work. People still want to play them. And that game is endlessly addictive. We just took an Xbox and built a custom cabinet that we're not charging for. We just want it on the floor because we think it's worth playing and it connects with the kind of older style. So what we'd like to see is more of that, just more cabinets that we don't have to build ourselves, that we can buy and put a coin mech on, So yeah, I think there's a lot of question marks as to where arcade bars go to once the nostalgia wears off.
So you mentioned very briefly, that you had indies and people they don't step up to them because they're not immediately recognizable. What indies have you seen on the market that you've had interest in that you think have potential if they had a little bit more marketing behind them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. There are games that we go out and play, and I don't like making decisions on things that I like. I didn't get into the business to put out games that I like. We track every token that goes through every machine every week religiously. That's just a part of what we do because we're constantly looking at that spreadsheet and trying to figure out what's working where and why, right? So there are games we've been interested in, like Killer Queen, for example. That's a big, bigger ticket game. And I know in larger cities, there's scenes in Chicago and Minneapolis and the big cities where it crushes. I mean, you have leagues and people get way into it. But I have talked to operators, who have had it in smaller markets and they've struggled with it. And I think it's trying to find, you have to build a critical mass. You have to have enough people who are into that sort of thing. And big cities are full of younger people who are into that type of thing. Here, it's a lot more casual. It's people who aren't really hardcore gamers, right? They want to play what they know. And so for our market, specifically, which is, under 500,000 metro and skews older, we have an older average age. They're looking for more things that they can either interact with, the boomerang hockeys, the Skeeballs, the things like that, the Papa Shots, and then the old games they remember. And so that's just, the reality that we live where we're at.
Yeah, I think that's really good that you can see your market and see what games would work there. Would you be open to demoing indie games if it was they sent it there for a couple months just to see how it worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're always open to put stuff on the floor and give it a try and see how we can. We've had events before, and we've had certain things that have been on and to varying levels of success. But again, it doesn't matter how we feel about it. At the end of the week, when we count the tokens, if there's just a slight rattle underneath there, it kind of tells us what we need to know. So we try to give things enough time, right? Several weeks. But that if you look at arcades, every square foot of an arcade is a piece of real estate, right? And so if it's not making the money that you think it should make in that spot, you got to find something that will. And we're constantly juggling with that, right? How do we give enough for everybody? How do we give enough diversity in game styles? And what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point because you can only fit so many games in a space, so you got to make sure that the games you put in there really get their bang for their buck, and everybody is enjoying them. You want to make sure that everybody that comes in really likes the game. Since you've had you're running multiple bars and multiple arcades, what advice would you give to someone maybe my age that's looking to jump into the arcade scene, bring an arcade to their area? Like, what advice would you give them that would set them up for success so that they don't hit some of the common hurdles?
I think a lot of arcades are like us, where you just kind of we're not big operators. We just kind of have something that we wanted to do, and I think I've seen a lot of arcades die out for one reason. It's basically you end up running out of capital. Like, I think making sure that you have streams of capital so that you can continue to grow and innovate is really, really important for an arcade. I think you can scrounge up your money and buy an initial run of games, but the games break a lot. You need a reliable game tech, and you have to keep on it. You have to keep on the coin mechs. You have to keep on those type of things. Pinball. I mean, pinball is a ton of work, and the parts are expensive. And when you don't own the pinball machine, your customers beat them up. I mean, they shake them, and they wonder why they're broken. And it's like, well, they're not supposed to be used that way. You know what I mean? So you have to remember, especially in arcade bars, you have people drinking, and things can go wrong. We've had an entire, playfield glass break on pinball before. So the type of thing where it's like there's a lot of kind of upkeep costs, and you have to reinvest in your own business. You always have to make sure that you have money to put back in it. You're going to want to pull it out because you earned it, but you have to have that discipline to just have capital at your disposal so that you can move forward. Because I've seen a lot of places go under because they just run out of cash.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, you got to be ready for, like you said, that one guy that breaks the play field on a pinball machine, and then that whole thing is inoperable, and you got to bring something in soon. I guess I'm curious about your own collection or games that you're interested in getting. Since you've been collecting for a while and you have multiple locations, what is your top 5 like holy grail games that if you could get your hands on, you'd buy them in a second?
Like that I would want?
Yes, like you personally, like maybe to go in your house, and probably not for the arcade.
Yeah. Man, I would love a Warlords. That would definitely be up there. I make it up to like pre-COVID, I was going up to Galloping Ghosts at least a couple times a year. And it's just, if anyone hasn't been there, it's the mecca for arcades. Just go up there and games like Food Fight, games like Timber. I really like the older games. Like, those are the games that I really, really love. Pinball wise, personally, I would love to own a Theater of Magic. My favorite pinball machine that I sold that I'll always regret is I had a Whirlwind that I would just beat to death. I love that game. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so many out there that, just as a fan, that I would love to have in my house. There's some weird stuff that I've played. I mean, like, there's a weird Domino's pinball machine. They only made a couple hundred, and it's actually like really fun. Things like that, like the weird one-off stuff that you see that you just know you're never going to find again. That's what makes the scene so fun, is because it's a small scene of people. You start to learn, get to know people, but in a deep warehouse somewhere, there's some deep cut game that I would love. It's just a matter of finding it.
I'm kind of thinking back to something you already said earlier with how Stern is forced to innovate now that they have multiple competitors. I know like Spooky Pinball and Jersey Jacks, right, is the other one that's kind of in the scene. What do you think is the best innovation that Stern has made on their games? I've seen a bunch with like Mandalorian and Godzilla, but what do you personally think is like the best innovation they've made?
Well, I mean, I think this one where you're connecting pinball to the real world, I think Godzilla has it. We don't have a Godzilla yet. But basically, this idea of scanning your phone and keeping your high scores and connecting the community, I think is absolutely huge. And I think that's the biggest innovation. When you have a machine that just stays in one place and you have to come in and see the high score, it's one thing. But when you have, someone, in Topeka, Kansas versus someone in Santa Barbara, California, and they're able to see their scores and battle back and forth in real time, I think that's a really exciting innovation. We have just a customer. He just moved out of town a few months ago. He had, the Time Crisis 2 world record for us for a while, and so we got to enjoy it with him. He was doing it on our machine, and getting to witness that was a super fun part of our job. So the more you can crank up the competition and build community, I think it's going to be better. And I have real high hopes for pinball. I think pinball is going in a really good direction. the one thing is the games are getting so expensive that it's hard for anyone to afford it. But if Stern sets the price and then 6 months later it's more expensive than what you bought it for, it's a good investment, you know? So there's a lot of good things happening in pinball.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to see pinball go, and I'm excited to see like all these indie games start to come out, because I feel like as I dig a little bit deeper, every couple of months I find another person that's developing an arcade game. They're just little teams. They're just hard to get the word out. So I'm glad to hear that a location like yours would be willing to have them in for a couple weeks, a month, to kind of test it out, see how it goes. I guess that's pretty much everything I had for you, Dan. Just shout out your social medias, let people know where they can find you so they can follow your journey.
Yeah, right on. We're on Instagram. We're at Analog Arcade Bar. We're also on Facebook as well, and we'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. I'm going to throw links to all your socials down in the description. Thank you for coming on, man. I appreciate talking to you. It was cool to talk about the future and what you really see moving in the arcade scene. And for anyone that's still listening, if you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us a ton. And until next time, peace.
Thanks, Joe.